Welcome back to the Virgin Palms Project Management Bootcamp. We are jumping right into Module 7, choosing the right project management framework. This is huge. You're going to learn how to really set yourself up for success in your projects. And trust me, picking the right framework is just as important as choosing the right foundation for a skyscraper.
Absolutely. Yeah, choosing the wrong framework, well, that can make or break your entire project. It's like you really need the right tool for the job.
Right. Like you were saying earlier, each project is different. They have their own little quirks and demands.
Exactly. And using the right framework, the right approach, can make all the difference between like a nice, smooth project and a totally chaotic one.
Okay, so let's see what we've got in our project management toolbox here. We've got waterfall, agile, scrum, Kanban, and even a hybrid approach.
I like to think of it as a buffet of project management styles.
Ooh, a buffet. I like that.
Yeah. And just like at a buffet, you want to choose the best dishes, or in this case, frameworks that really work for you. So let's break down each of these frameworks. Let's start with waterfall.
Okay, waterfall. Sounds pretty straightforward. Does it live up to its name?
It absolutely does. Waterfall is all about sequential progress. So think of an actual waterfall. The water flows in one direction, just like projects in this framework.
Yeah.
Each phase, like the initiation, planning, execution, and closure, they happen step by step. It's a classic method, especially for projects where the requirements are super clear and there's not much room for change.
I see. So like constructing a bridge or manufacturing something.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, can you imagine trying to change the design of a bridge while you're building it? That would be chaos. And Waterfall helps avoid that by making sure things happen in a specific order.
So waterfall is a good choice if you need that really predictable, structured approach. But what if you need to adapt quickly? Like in software development, things move so fast.
You're right. That's where Agile comes in. Agile is totally different. It embraces change. Agile is all about improving continuously. It's like, think of a gymnast adapting to a new routine based on feedback.
Agile is like reacting to changes as they happen.
That's it. It's perfect for projects where feedback is key and you got to be able to move quickly, like developing an app. You can release a basic version, get feedback from the users, and then make it better and better.
So if waterfall is a symphony, agile is like jazz.
That's a great way to put it. And then within Agile, you have different methods like Scrum. Scrum takes Agile to a whole new level of fast-paced.
Scrum sprints. I'm
Yes.
sensing a theme here. So is Scrum as intense as it sounds?
It can be, but in a good way. Scrum breaks a project down into short bursts of work, like sprints that usually last a week or two.
Okay, so you're sprinting towards the finish line.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And each sprint aims to deliver a piece of the product that could actually be shipped or used. It's all about teamwork and getting things done quickly.
So everyone's working together really closely.
Yes. And there's a Scrum Master, kind of like a coach. They keep everyone on track and help overcome any obstacles that pop up along the way.
I like that. A coach to keep the team moving. Okay, and what about Kanban? What's that all about?
Kanban is all about visualizing your work. Imagine a whiteboard with sticky notes. Each sticky note is a task, and they move through columns that represent different stages of the workflow.
Oh, I can see how that would be helpful. You can literally see where everything is at.
Right, you can see what's to do, what's in progress, what's done. It helps you spot bottlenecks and keep things moving smoothly.
So would you say Kanban is more free-flowing than Scrum, which is very structured with those sprints?
Yes, definitely. Kanban is designed for projects that have a continuous flow, like handling customer support tickets or ongoing software maintenance.
Okay, so we have Waterfall for structured projects, Agile for flexibility and change, Scrum for intense sprints, and Kanban for visualizing workflow. That's quite a spread.
It is. And then there's the hybrid approach.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Right. The hybrid approach is like creating your own recipe.
Sure.
You pick and choose elements from the other frameworks to fit your specific needs.
So you can create a project management style that is truly unique to your project.
Exactly. It's all about getting the perfect blend of structure and flexibility.
So before we move on to Module 2, where we dive deeper into each framework, let's pause for a moment. Any key takeaways from our overview that you want to highlight for our listeners?
Absolutely. The big takeaway here is that there's no one perfect framework. Each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, and choosing the right one really depends on your project, your team, and what you want to achieve.
It's about using the right tool for the right job.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like having a whole toolkit, right? And you got to know which tool is going to work best for each situation. You wouldn't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail.
Right. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into each framework. Let's start with waterfall. When does waterfall really shine?
Well, waterfall is perfect for projects where the requirements are really well defined. Like everything's laid out clearly up front. Like you know what you need to build, you know the scope of the project, and you don't expect too many changes along the way.
So like building that bridge we were talking about earlier, or maybe launching a satellite.
Exactly, exactly. Those kinds of projects need a very meticulous plan where each step, each phase builds on the previous one. And that's where waterfall is great. It gives you that clear roadmap.
But what if you're working on something where the needs are constantly changing? You know, like a new software application or a marketing campaign. Wouldn't waterfall's rigid structure be a problem?
You're absolutely right. Waterfall isn't great at adapting to change. Imagine banking a house and halfway through, the client decides they want an extra bedroom. In a waterfall approach, that would mean going back to the very beginning, redoing a lot of the planning, and it could really mess up the timelines and budgets.
Oh, yeah, I can see how that would be a nightmare. So that's where Agile comes in, right?
Mhm.
For those situations where you need to be more flexible.
Precisely. Agile shines when the requirements might change, when feedback is crucial, and when you need to adapt quickly. Think of it like navigating a ship through uncharted waters. You constantly have to adjust your course based on the winds and currents, right?
I get it. Agile lets you be nimble and responsive to whatever comes your way. Okay, but how does Agile work in practice?
Agile is all about embracing change, putting the customer first, and working together as a team. It focuses on delivering value in smaller chunks so you can get feedback early and often and make sure you're building the right thing.
So you're not waiting till the very end to see if you're on the right track. You're getting feedback all along the way.
Exactly. And that's how you make sure you're building something people actually want and need.
Okay, so we talked about Scrum earlier. How does that fit into the Agile picture?
So Scrum is one of the most popular ways to do Agile. It uses those short sprints we talked about, those bursts of work that typically last a week or two. Each sprint starts with the team picking tasks from the product backlog, which is like a wish list of features and requirements. Then the team works together to get those tasks done. They meet every day to check in with each other and see how things are going.
It's like having a daily huddle.
Yes, exactly. And at the end of the sprint, the team shows what they've built and gets feedback. It's very collaborative and fast-paced.
And the Scrum Master is there to guide the team through all of this.
Yes, the Scrum Master is like a coach or a facilitator. They help the team stay focused, remove roadblocks, and just generally make sure things are running smoothly.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about Kanban.
Yeah.
You described it earlier as a way to visualize your workflow. Can you tell us more about how it works?
Sure. With Kanban, you have a board. It can be physical or digital, and you use cards to represent tasks. These cards move through columns that show different stages of the workflow, like to do, in progress, review, and done.
Okay, so you can literally see where every task is at any given moment.
That's it. And this visual representation helps you see any bottlenecks, any places where work is getting stuck, so you can fix those problems and keep things moving.
So what kinds of projects is Kanban good for?
Kanban is great for projects that have a continuous flow of tasks, like managing customer support tickets or ongoing software maintenance or maybe even content creation. It's all about keeping work moving smoothly and efficiently.
I see. So while Scrum is like sprinting, Kanban is more like a steady marathon.
That's a great analogy. Kanban is about maintaining that steady flow of work, making sure things are always moving forward.
Okay, so we've talked about Waterfall, Agile, Scrum, and Kanban. That leaves us with the hybrid approach. When would it make sense to use a mix of these different frameworks?
The hybrid approach is great when you have a project that has different parts that might benefit from different methodologies. For instance, you might start with waterfall for the planning phase of a big project, where it's important to have a really clear plan and scope. But then once you move into the execution phase, you might switch to agile to be more flexible and responsive to changes.
So you're basically customizing your approach, picking the best of each framework to fit your specific needs.
Exactly. And that can be really powerful, especially for complex projects. It allows you to be adaptable and tailor your approach as you go along.
It's like being a chef who knows how to use all the different cooking techniques to create a perfect dish.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we've covered the different frameworks. Now, before we move on to the next module where we'll talk about how to actually choose the right framework for your projects, are there any key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that no one framework is the magic solution. You know, it's about understanding what each framework can offer, like what are its strengths and weaknesses. And then you can decide which one fits best for your project and your team.
That's right. It's like having a toolbox full of options. Okay, so let's move on to module 2. Choosing the right framework for your projects. This is where we put all this knowledge into action. How do we actually go about picking the right framework?
So it's kind of like choosing ingredients for a recipe, right? You got to
Mm.
think about what you're making, what you like, and what you have available.
Mm.
In the same way, when you're choosing a project management framework, there are a few things to consider, like how complex is the project? How much do you need to involve stakeholders? What are your team's preferences? And are there any standards you need to follow in your industry? Okay, so let's unpack those one by one, starting with project complexity. How do we know if a project is simple or complex? And how does that affect which framework we choose?
Well, you can figure out the complexity of a project by looking at a few things, like how many tasks are there, how connected are those tasks, are the requirements really clear, are there any risks or uncertainties, and how much technology are you using?
Yeah, those are all important things to consider.
Right. So a simple project with a clear scope and not too many dependencies might be fine with waterfall. But a super complex project where things are changing all the time and there's a lot of uncertainty might need something more like agile.
So the more complex the project, the more likely we'd lean towards agile.
Yeah, that's a good general rule. Agile is really good at handling those complex situations.
Okay, now what about stakeholder involvement? How much does that matter when we're choosing a framework?
So stakeholder involvement is all about how much the stakeholders, like your clients, customers, or bosses, need to be involved in the project. Some projects need constant communication and collaboration, while others just need updates every now and then.
I see.
If your stakeholders need to be part of the decision-making process and give feedback often, then Agile is probably a better fit.
Right, because agile has those built-in feedback loops.
Exactly. Agile keeps the stakeholders in the loop, and that can really help get everyone on board and make the project more successful.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the team's preferences? Do they get a say in which framework we use?
Oh, absolutely. If your team really likes structure and predictability, they might be happier with Waterfall. But if they like things to be more flexible and collaborative, Agile might be a better choice. You really got to think about the team's strengths and what they're comfortable with.
It's like building a team, right? You want
Yeah.
to make sure everyone works well together.
Exactly. Okay. And then the last thing to consider is industry standards. Are there any rules or best practices that we need to follow?
Yeah, are there certain industries where one framework is more common than others?
Yes, definitely. Some industries have really strict rules about how projects need to be managed, like healthcare or finance. They might need a lot of documentation and a very specific process. Waterfall might be the best option there. But in other industries, like software development, Agile is much more common, because things move so fast.
It's all about being aware of what's expected in your industry.
Right. So we've talked about all the factors to consider when you're choosing a framework. Now let's move on to Module 3. Applying the right framework to your work. How do we actually put all of this into practice?
Okay, so we've got the theory. How do we make it work in the real world?
Well, first things first, you got to teach your team about the framework you've chosen. Make sure everyone understands the principles, the roles, the responsibilities, all of that.
Right, it's not enough to just pick a framework and expect everyone to know what to do.
It's like learning a new language. You got to learn the grammar and vocabulary before you can speak it, right?
That's a good analogy.
So, yeah, give your team the training they need to use the framework effectively.
Okay. What else? Any other tips for successful implementation?
Well, don't be afraid to adapt the framework. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Make adjustments to fit your team and the specific project you're working on.
So it's okay to tweak things a little as long as we're still following the main principles of the framework.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. And also, don't forget to track your progress and see how things are going. That way you can make improvements as you go along.
So it's like a continuous learning process, right?
Yeah,
Implement, track, learn, improve.
that's exactly it. You always got to be open to feedback and keep getting better.
This has been a really fascinating look at project management frameworks. I feel like I've learned so much. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, just remember, choosing the right framework is key to project success. But also, don't be afraid to experiment. Try things out and see what works best for you and your team. There's no one perfect way to do it.
Great advice. Project management is all about learning and adapting. Congratulations on finishing Module 7 of the Virgin Palms Project Management Bootcamp. We'll see you in the next module. This service was brought to you by Virgin Palms, www.virginpalms.org.